Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Intercooler podcast. This is episode 238 with Dan Prosser and Andrew Frankel. Lots and lots of things that we want to talk about this week, Andrew. Actually, we're going to have to rattle through a lot of these topics.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ground that we want to cover.
Speed casting.
Can we discuss the US election results without putting off a load of people?
I think if we do it very quickly.
Okay. There you go. So that's a promise, everyone. We'll do it very quickly.
Yeah. We're going to do this in 2 minutes, maybe 3.
Okay. Before we actually get started,
Yeah.
I am going to remind all of you, as I do most weeks, that as a podcast listener, you are entitled to a 15% discount on the cost of subscribing to the Intercooler. We have a online ad-free, multi-award-winning car magazine, which we think is really good, and people tell us it's good as well. And as a podcast listener, you get to subscribe at 15% off. And you can do so by taking out a subscription and at checkout use coupon code POD15. Now, why would you do that? One, it's the best way to support the podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, if you listen most weeks, it's the best way to keep it going, essentially.
There are some people, we've discovered this, who subscribe to the website and the app just because they want to support us. Yeah. And I cannot tell you how much we appreciate that.
Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. So that's one big reason. But the other one is that the magazine is, we have the best team of automotive writers working anywhere in the world today. We are convinced of that. And the stuff that they produce is just amazing.
And we're convinced of it because we keep on saying it and nobody has ever contradicted us.
They haven't.
And if you go and look on our writers page at not just the journalists, but the drivers, the engineers, the designers, the people who actually do the stuff that we report upon, I don't think you could argue that contention that it's the best lineup of writers writing about cars anywhere in the world right now. And we do it a brand new, freshly commissioned story every single day of the working week.
Yeah. So there you go. Those are the two reasons to subscribe to the Intercooler's online car magazine.
Yep.
Coupon code POD15 for a 15% discount. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Trump. We're not going to get political. We're not going to talk about what this means. No, you can, but you have a theory, don't you, about what it might mean for the automotive?
Yeah, I mean,
sector.
the reason we're doing this is really because it clearly has effects all around the world, including here, and there's a particular interest because of his tie-up with Elon Musk, who is now being employed as Trump's man to sort of reduce waste in government departments and everything else. Trump went on a little-known podcast hosted by a bloke called Joe Rogan.
No, I've heard of him.
Oh, okay. And on it,
a fellow podcaster,
and on it, you go and listen to it. He says, "Do you know what the most beautiful word in the world is?" And he says, it's not love or anything like that. The most beautiful word in the world is tariff.
Oh, my God.
Okay?
Wow.
Which gives you some idea of his isolationist, protectionist instincts and what he may do. Factor that in with the Musk effect. And, who knows, because, and this is not me being political, I think it's just me just stating fact, is what Trump says and what he actually goes on to do are not always one and the same thing. But if you take him at his word, you have to expect that Trump will start putting huge tariffs on most things coming out of China, electric vehicles and electric vehicle batteries in particular. And this may well explain why arch-Democrat and the man who's called Trump nuts and the world champion of bullshit is now employed by his government. Clearly it is in Musk's interests that competition. Tesla is no longer the world's biggest maker of electric vehicles anymore. That's BYD. China control well over half the world's battery production, and so you can see the motivation behind this. And the problem, and where I think the problem becomes global, is that clearly these things don't happen in isolation. There will inevitably be a tit-for-tat exchange. The tariffs won't just apply to the Chinese. They'll probably be lower for European brands. But if you are a company like JLR, hoping to export a load of cars to America because they're far and away your largest market, if he puts a 20% tariff on, that has a seismic effect on your ability to do business. And and it's inflationary, and I don't know, but it's hard to see. The thing is at the moment, isn't it, that, and we'll get on to talk about Jaguar in a minute, but for those companies that have staked their future on EV, goodness knows, times are tough enough as they are at the moment, without having to figure out how to, work around that kind of imposition on you. So I think that's really all I want to say, is that if he does what he says he's going to do, if tariff really is the most beautiful word in the world, then however tough things are now, I fear they're going to get tougher still.
Yeah, there'll be huge implications
Massive.
worldwide for car makers who are already, frankly, having a terrible time of it. A lot of them, most of them probably.
Yeah.
Gosh, yeah. So,
but Elon will be happy.
Well, yeah. But do you think if you are, I don't know, a blue collar, you're in Detroit, you're in Motor City, you're reliant on the car trade, you're cock a hoop about all this, aren't you?
I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? You might be, but not even Ford and General Motors can survive on domestic sales alone.
I don't necessarily think you're up in the boardroom at these places.
Yeah.
You're a salesman, or you have a workshop or something.
Yeah.
You're probably delighted about protecting the US car industry, aren't you?
Yeah, well, you might be, and in the short term, perhaps you are. But these things tend to, the law of unintended consequences. These things tend to ripple around, and if everything gets more expensive, that's not good for anybody. So I understand exactly the point you're trying to make, and maybe that is what will happen. But I suspect that won't be the end of it. But we shall see.
We're going to see, aren't we?
Yeah.
It's going to rumble on. Okay, so one of the key incentives for a long time for EV buyers in the UK was that there was no road tax to pay.
Yes.
So that could be a meaningful saving.
Yes. Yes. Compared to the VED due on a particularly perhaps a quite CO2 hungry petrol car, absolutely massive savings. Yeah.
Not anymore, or not for long.
No, we have said, haven't we? We've always said that one of the biggest problems that government faces is with the EV transition is where to get the tax back.
Yeah.
Because I can't remember the figure, but it is tens of billions of pounds that return to the Treasury through fuel.
Yeah, I think it's 70-80% of the cost of a litre of fuel is tax.
Yeah. And if everybody stops buying petrol, which the new Labour government is, well, they've gone back to the old rules that it's going to be a ban on pure petrol and diesel cars by 2030, and then all hybrids gone by 2035. And I don't think that what a hybrid is has actually been defined yet. So we will have to see about that. But I think we are seeing the first stage of it. So as of April next year, all electric cars will be subject to vehicle excise duty. So even the very cheapest ones are going to cost £140 to tax. If you have what they call the expensive car supplement, be interesting to know what people out there think in terms of EV, what an expensive car is, because I suspect they're probably thinking, oh, it's going to be like a sort of top-end Audi or Mercedes. Well, it's not. It's £40,000. And, we know how expensive EVs are, and £40,000 may sound like a lot of money, but actually in the context of the EVs that are on sale today, it's not much money.
No.
But if you spend £40,000 on an EV as of next April, I think there might be a concession in the first year, but after that it's another £410 on top of the 140. So that's £550 you're paying for your and again, as we were saying in the first bit, we were talking about Trump, as if EV manufacturers didn't have a hard enough job selling their wares at the moment. That's not going to make life any easier.
It's a significant amount. If you're paying
it is
£300 a month on your lease or your PCP, that's another £50 a month that you have to find to tax it.
Yeah,
it's really significant, actually.
Yeah.
Okay,
but then from the government's point of view, and I am no apologist for this or any other government, but they've got to do something.
Yeah, they have.
If they are going to push through, and I do think that 2030 is is far too early, and I'd be much more comfortable with 2035. But nevertheless, if they are intent on doing that, well, they've got to put the processes in place which will allow them to do that without, losing all those billions and billions of tax money.
Without really meaning to, this is going to turn into a bit of an EVs podcast, just because we've been driving a few of them recently. I've got another one that I want to talk about. Goodness me, actually, there's a lot. This is unintentionally the EVs episode, so
yes.
Bear with us.
We'll try to make it interesting.
Yes,
promise.
The next one will not be, categorically. So you want to talk about a couple of EVs that you've been driving recently, Porsche Macan, Alfa Romeo Junior.
Yeah, I'll do both very quickly.
Go on.
Alfa Romeo Junior.
Was this the one that was called Milano, but because it's not built in Italy?
Yeah, there's a law in Italy which says you can't call something after a place it doesn't come from.
It's a good job they had a decent name to fall back on, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually I think Junior's a much better name than Milano. I think Junior's a fantastic name, and it's unlike Milano, it is steeped in Alfa heritage. And anybody who's as old and crusty as me and has been lucky enough to drive sort of 1960s Alfa Juniors, with beautiful little twin cam 1600 engines and lovely 5-speed boxes and disc brakes and all that sort of thing. They're just wonderful cars. Love them.
Yeah.
They did a GTA Junior. So the 60s GTA, the absolute, the iconic sort of touring car of the time, three-wheeling with yoke and rin to the wheel. After they did 500 of those, they did 500 GTA Juniors with 1300cc engines, and they were quite cool too. Anyway, I digress. The new Junior's not like that. And not just because it's built...
But it's got a twin-cam engine, hasn't it? Oh.
And not just because it's built in a factory in Poland. It goes down the same line as the Jeep Avenger and various Citroens and DSs. And
it looks great, though.
And other stuff. It does look great. Yeah. But Alphas can't live by looks alone, can they? Or should?
Well, they've tried.
I mean, there's so little to say about this car because it's just an EV. It's just another small EV. If you drove it or were driven in it or blindfolded, there is literally nothing about it that I could discern which was in any way identifiably Alfa Romeo. And, it's a shame. It's a shame. That marque's identity has been reduced to its appearance. And beyond that, it's just another EV. And, it's not bad. A Jeep Avenger, which is essentially the same car. I mean, that's a good car for an EV, but I don't mind it in a Jeep. And there'll be people listening to this all sort of saying, well, okay, well, if it's a perfectly good EV, which it is, then what does it matter if it's got a different badge on it? It's only the badge that's the problem. But to me, don't we all buy cars from manufacturers because we identify with them and we expect certain things out of them? And everything that I'd like an Alfa Romeo to be, it isn't.
And can it be? Have they missed a trick, or are they just...
I'm not even blaming them for it. I'm not sure really. Well, maybe they could. Actually, well, you would be a good person to ask this because I haven't driven an Alpine A290 yet, and you have. So can you do that with an EV? Can you actually make it involving? And having read what you wrote about it, I think the answer is that to an extent, yes, you can. So maybe they should have tried harder. Maybe they should have just said, okay, fine, the powertrain is the powertrain. It's just going to go, but maybe we'll make some interesting noises like Hyundai have done, or maybe we will just, really stiffen the back up and, just really make sure that it, if nothing else, you can three-wheel it up a good hill with lots of hairpins in it.
So that's more or less what Alpine have done. And this is quite an interesting topic, actually, the A290. So it's the Renault 5-based EV hot hatch.
It's also the next Alpine after the A110.
It's the second one, yeah.
Talk about acts to follow,
but
expectations.
At least there is a clear target to aim for, that it should be, of its type, the most fun to drive.
Yeah.
It's obvious that that's what an Alpine should be.
Yes.
Following the A110. I did the launch on Mallorca. We drove the top-of-the-line model, the GTS, 218 brake horsepower, single motor, front-wheel drive, £38,000 thereabouts in the UK. 1,400
£38. Oh, so it's going to. It's actually that will get under
the expensive car tax. Yeah. 1,479 kilograms. The Mini is just over 1,600. They're very, very comparable cars otherwise. The Coupe,
but the Alpine is over 100 kilos lighter.
126. Yeah.
Yeah, and you remember when we drove the electric Mini with a petrol Mini.
Yeah.
And the first thing you noticed about the car, actually almost more than the powertrain, is just the additional mass of that car.
Yeah, you feel it immediately.
Absolutely instantly.
The A290 is a way more enjoyable car than the Mini.
Yeah.
So
it can be done.
You can make them lighter than others, but it's 1,500 kilograms. It's a little car. We know that EVs are carrying a lot of weight at the moment, and hopefully that will change.
So, but when I say it can be done, what you can do is, through all sorts of measures, weight being one of them, is you can make a compact hatchback-based EV fun to drive.
Yeah, to an extent. So this clearly isn't the first performance EV, but as I see it, it is the first EV from a pure performance car manufacturer.
Oh, we're not including the MG Cyberster here, presumably.
What? No. So the A290 has a very clear remit. It should be the most fun to drive car of its type.
Yes.
So I was really eager to drive it.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's really impressive. In others, it just doesn't go far enough. So I was really amazed to find that I missed a combustion engine and a transmission of some sort quite so much. Not necessarily for the the interaction of a gear shift or whatever, but just the vibrations, just the sense of crescendo, the sense of something building.
It's all part of the connection, isn't it?
It is, and I was amazed that it felt like a core part of the connection that was missing in the A290. And what I found was that I would put my foot down from a low or moderate speed, and the thing would get going, and it's quite brisk actually. It does shift. It's got a load of torque, instant torque. But because you're doing nothing else, and because there are no vibrations, no particular soundtrack, it doesn't feel fast because it's all you've got to think about. You're just holding on, extending your right ankle.
Yeah. And
so it's a strangely one-dimensional
Whereas if it were a Renault 5, without that badge, without that level of expectation,
it would be lovely.
And I drove a Renault 5 and I thought it was certainly of its kind, and maybe, just generally speaking, the best EV I've driven. Because it doesn't have, and the fact that it is pleasant to drive is actually a sort of a bonus. It's sort of slightly unexpected.
It's
because
not trying to be a hot hatch.
You kind of expect it to be like for want of a better example, an Alfa Junior.
Yeah. It's not. So because this A290 has got a very clear remit, it's really up against it. And when there is no great powertrain to enjoy, all your attention is diverted to the chassis, to the ride and handling, the way it steers.
Yeah.
And actually, before I get onto that, there's a lot that I really liked about the A290. So the cabin is really cool. The car feels substantial for a little car.
Yeah.
Relatively little car. It rides nicely. It is refined. Like it's a really pleasant thing to be in. Is there something else coming? Is this the sort of the amuse-bouche of A290s, and there's going to be a nutter coming, which
it seems so.
It seems
with no rear seats, or they stripped a load of weight out of it.
I don't know about no rear seats. They didn't deny that you could fit a second motor on the rear axle, or a motor on the rear axle, make it four-wheel drive twin motor. They didn't deny that. I think there will be other versions.
Yeah.
So it feels like this one is just a bit corked. So the point is, you're looking for some magic in the chassis.
Yeah.
In the driving experience from the ride and handling perspective, and it's really good. And the car feels lively, and it's super poised, and it's agile, and it's quite a communicative car actually. So you can put it on the limit of grip really easily, and you feel it. But there isn't enough spark in the chassis to really keep you amused.
Yeah,
I was on some great hillside roads. Mallorca's amazing for driving if you get onto the best roads there, and it just left me strangely unmoved. Sadly.
And that's the problem, isn't it? Because if you remove the powertrain from the sort of fun equation, because it's just a thing now, is exactly what you're saying. It is so much more important that the chassis, which frankly is the only other way of sort of the driver interacting with the car and enjoying the car, it becomes so much more important that is absolutely top draw, because it's all the car has got. It's all the thing, it's all Alpine has to be able to say to everybody out there, to all car enthusiasts out there, we've got this. We understand.
Yeah.
So it is a bit strange, isn't it, that well, I haven't driven it, but, from what you're saying, it's a bit of a pulled punch.
Yeah, because this is probably going to be the volume seller. I think most people buying it will go for this version because it's not that much more expensive than the others. I don't know about that actually, but the point being, it has to have a broad appeal. And so if there is a different, more sporting variant coming, maybe that will be the one that's really uncorked and is actually quite good fun. The weird thing about the A290...
But it'll be heavier, won't it? Inevitably.
Well, why?
Well, because you've got to put, rear axle drive in it.
It doesn't have to have that though.
No.
If they just went a bit more extreme with the chassis setup, and I don't mean ruin the ride at all, but the balance, and get a bit more power out of it.
That's what I'd try and do.
There's stuff that they could do.
I wouldn't even try and necessarily. Well, I mean, if you can get a bit more power out of what you've already got, but I wouldn't go giving a car like that four-wheel drive. I would just try to I'd try to sharpen up the handling, make it a bit softer at the front, bit stiffer at the back, usual form or whatever.
Yeah.
Get some weight out of it.
It does need some sort of mechanical limited slip differential.
Yeah.
If there is a more sporting one.
Yeah.
They decided they didn't want it because the system that they use using the brakes, like a lot of manufacturers do, it doesn't corrupt the steering so much and all that stuff, which is I understand. But given that there is nothing about the powertrain to enjoy, I wouldn't mind if when I put my foot down, I felt the wheel tugging a little bit.
A little bit. It's great.
Just that
it's
bit
involvement. You want it to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody thinks of, torque steer as being a dirty word. And it kind of is when it becomes uncontrollable.
Yeah.
But actually, if it just makes the car feel a bit alive in your hands.
There you go.
Bring it on.
The curious thing about the A290 as it is, so they put on a little handling circuit for us to have a go on.
Yeah.
And when you've got the space and the license, I suppose, to really explore the limits of what this car can do, it does get quite lively.
Yeah.
The way people aren't going to do track days in their 290s, are they? I wouldn't have thought. And I don't know what it's going to be like on a bigger circuit, but on a tight little fiddly one,
you can bung it.
It's all about the bung.
Yeah.
You flick it one way, then the other.
Yeah.
You come off the power at the right time, and you can just back it into corners.
Fantastic.
It just needs a bit more of that on the road.
Absolutely.
And it could be really good.
It just needs a bit more Fiesta ST about it.
Oh, that is the car that I just kept thinking about. If it could steer and handle like an ST, I wouldn't mind too much about the lack of a combustion engine. I really wouldn't.
No. And what does an ST weigh? About
11,
12, something like that.
Yeah.
So it is a lot heavier than that.
Yeah.
But you should
be
able to...
the weight is on the floor.
Yeah.
It's evenly distributed between the axles.
Yeah. You should be able to get a lot closer to it than it sounds.
That's
like
what I think.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
But it's actually a pleasant car and reasonably enjoyable to a point.
Yeah.
I just have to imagine there's more to come from the Alpine A290. Okay. This next one, we're going to tread very carefully.
Oh,
because you've signed a scary NDA.
I signed a scary, and I'm not even going to tell you why I signed a scary NDA or anything. People can draw their own conclusions. But we're going to talk about the Jaguar.
No, you are. I'm going to sit here quietly.
Okay, fine. Okay, so what do we know? We know that Jaguar has released some shots of a highly camouflaged car, which when it goes into production in 2026, my guess is quite late in 2026, will be a four-door GT. I imagine in the sort of vogue of a sort of Porsche Taycan, that sort of thing. And we know that also that there is going to be a big saloon, and we know that there's going to be an SUV, and these are all going to come off a thing called the JEA platform, which is a bespoke, dedicated Jaguar platform, which no Land Rovers sit on, which is called Jaguar Electrical Architecture, I think. Probably got that wrong. Doesn't matter. And so, and this, as we know, Jaguar have stopped production. There are no Jaguars being built at the moment for the first time since, I think, 1948. Wow. I don't know any other manufacturer that's ever done this, ever basically just stopped. Dealers must be loving them. And in the meantime, on December the 2nd, but it'll be in the evening and in Miami, so my guess is actually in the early hours of December the 3rd in the UK, a new concept car is going to be unveiled in Florida, which will preview the design language of the new production Jaguar. If you go and look on the Intercooler website and app, you'll be able to see all the photographs. I think they released three. Of the car. It's not the concept car. We know that the camouflage car in those photographs is the production car. If you look at it, you can tell it's got a conspicuously long wheelbase. It's got a very short front overhang. It's got a very long rear overhang. It seems to have a very low roof line.
Very swoopy roof
line.
Yeah,
and those are the sorts of things which you can't really change with camouflage unless you're going to put a completely spurious body on it. It's got a big radiator intake in the front. We'll ignore that because we know it's electric, so that's fine. And beyond that, you really can't tell very much. Apart from, I guess, the car looks, the way it's proportioned, it's quite cab rearward, quite traditionally like that. If in those Jaguars, particularly the sports cars, if you sit in an E-Type, the sense is that you're sitting almost on the rear axle with this enormous bonnet stretching out in front of you. And quite clearly, that's the way that Jaguar want to go. Now, with EV architecture, there's clearly no need to do that. Someone, I think, in the comments for my stories went, well, what's going to be under that enormous bonnet?
Yeah.
Well, who knows? But that's not what it's about. It's about creating a certain design form. It's just, okay, I think if you just look at the proportions of it, it looks bold.
And it's
everything we've heard about, people who've sort of seen the production car and nods and winks and this sort of stuff. What you hear is that the car is going to be bold. And goodness me, it needs to be, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it's going to trade on the way it looks.
Yeah.
As much as anything.
Yeah.
This thing.
Yeah.
It has to be, it doesn't have to thrill and delight everyone in the way it looks, but it has to be super desirable to a significant number of people with the money.
Yeah.
And they have to want one.
On that point, when you say with the money, that's exactly the point. Because the other thing we should say, and I know we've said it before, but it bears repeating, is that Jaguar, we also know, is completely repositioning itself. If you think of the Jaguar that was selling sort of, E-Paces and XEs and XFs, all these premium, probably lower end premium cars, that is so much part of Jaguar's history now. That is gone. It is going to become a pure luxury manufacturer. I would personally be surprised if Jaguar ever tries to sell a car for less than a six-figure sum again.
Yeah.
And I think of Jaguars that have ever sold for more than a six-figure sum in the past. XJ220?
Yeah, I'm sure there were F-types.
Project cars.
Project 7 and 8.
Yeah, maybe. But, but niche. Yeah. Whereas I think the cheapest standard production, well, I don't know, but my guess is that the cheapest standard production Jaguar of the future, the first number will be a 1.
Now this is actually, it would seem as though we'd planned this, but we really haven't. This is pure fluke. So one of the cars that the first Jaguar in this new era is going to have to go up against is the Audi S e-tron GT.
Gosh, who'd have thought it?
Do you know, mine was delivered yesterday.
Your own personal car, bought with your own hard-earned.
Well, no. So this is a long-term test car. I've got it for a few months, but it shares its platform with the Taycan, doesn't it? So this is a direct competitor to this new Jaguar.
We think. Well, insofar as we know that it's a four-door GT and it's electric, and we think we know the positioning. So yes, certainly from what we know, absolutely, it is a completely direct competitor for this car.
So the list price of the Audi is £108,680.
Yeah, so it seems completely bang on.
So it does seem like this is the car, one of the cars that the Jaguar is going to have to go up against.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be really interesting to live with this thing for a few months.
Yes.
So because it's the S e-tron GT, it's not the RS. It's got 584 brake horsepower, up to 671 brake horsepower in launch control, which I haven't done yet.
Okay. But that actually sounds quite sensible. It doesn't sound like a completely... I mean, I know there was a time when 580 horsepower was unimaginably, but these days, when you've got 1,000 horsepower...
Well, this is it. So I did drive the RS e-tron GT Performance. Audi has just facelifted the e-tron GT, which is why there are new versions of it knocking about, and that's what I've got, the S. But I drove the RS e-tron GT Performance a couple of weeks ago. That has 915 brake horsepower, and it's the one that I drove with options was 170-something thousand pounds.
Are the residuals of those going the same way as residuals on the Taycans?
I haven't checked, but they would do, wouldn't they?
Well, unless there are just many fewer of them around. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's a good question, actually. But I'm sure they've slipped a heck of a lot because most of these cars do tend to. But that RS e-tron GT performance, it's the most powerful Audi road car ever. And I did briefly wonder if it's the most powerful Audi of any kind. The LMP1 cars apparently had about 1,000.
Yeah, they would have been. Yeah.
And the F1 car that we'll see at the end of 2025 for the first time will have about 1,000.
Yeah.
So this,
but it's right up there.
It's
isn't
not
it?
far off.
Yeah.
And it is phenomenally quick.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, I've only done 15 miles or so in the e-tron GT. That feels absolutely as brisk as you need one of these things to do.
Of course.
You're straining your neck to keep it off the headrest. So you just do not need any more than the near 600 horsepower this thing's got.
I think the point that I would like to explain, and I say this now, it sounds slightly patronising to say that, but I say this now because I'm only really starting to, I've always known it, but it's only really starting to properly sink in now, is the period of time that elapses in an ICE car, an internally combustion engine car, between you putting your foot on the accelerator, so you giving the car the instruction, and it even starting to execute that instruction. This is why Porsche says that the hybrid 911, the new hybrid 911, is quicker off the line than a Turbo S. Because when you've got electricity involved, that period of time is not measurable. Whereas in anything else, it is. And the thing about EVs is that, on paper, that time is never measured because an 0 to 60 time is always measured from when the car starts to move. But actually, that lag between foot on throttle and car starting to react is, by EV standards, enormous in an ICE car and non-existent in an EV car. Now, if you've got a car like yours with 500 and goodness knows how many horsepower, it's going to actually overtake, for instance, in a way that you'd probably need 800 horsepower in an ICE car to do.
Yeah.
Because you'd still have to wait for that to wind itself up and find the right gear and go. So actually, the horsepower figure is almost slightly misleading because it has the effect when you actually feel it in the real world when you're trying to overtake stuff, which is what it's probably most useful for. It's actually even more extreme than the numbers suggest.
Yeah. They feel quicker than the horsepower figure suggests. Certainly the e-tron GT does.
Yeah.
And for dispatching other traffic or joining a busy roundabout or pulling out into a motorway or whatever.
Yeah.
It is phenomenal having all that go under your right foot.
Yeah. Are you having fun yet? Well, not in 15 miles, I guess.
Not in 15 miles, but in the
that's basically home to Bristol to this podcast.
More or less. But the driving that I've done on it so far, I'm really enjoying it. It's a lovely thing to be in.
Yeah.
It's got a great seating position. It steers nicely. It does drive well. It rides well. It does handle really neatly. I haven't yet found any sort of fun and real driving pleasure in it, but I haven't been on those roads yet, so we'll see.
What does it weigh?
I actually haven't looked that up yet, but it's going to be 2.3. I'm going to take it to a weighbridge actually and do it properly.
Yeah,
because I want to know what the exact figure is. But it, like all these cars, it doesn't feel that heavy because it does handle really well. The steering is sharp. It is quite quick because the car is so fast. It doesn't feel as heavy as it is. But this is one of the things that it has sort of crystallized in my mind just over the past few months, particularly driving the new M5. That's a 2.5 ton car.
Yeah.
Heavy cars can be made to handle really well. They can be agile. They can feel a lot lighter than they are. What they cannot do, and I haven't driven a heavy car that does this yet, so I don't think it can be done, is feel interactive, right? The way that a much lighter car. We all know that feeling of being connected to a great performance car of some sort. You feel everything. Yeah. You feel the grip. You feel the balance of the car. You feel the body, just how it's moving, how the weight is shifting. There's a sense of connection through everything, through the steering. You can't do that in a heavy car. I'm convinced of it now.
So I think we have to explain. See, I mean, you and I I think probably every other motoring journalist in the world, use this term that a car handles well. But of course, that can mean very different things.
Yeah.
So we can say a car handles well, and what we actually mean is that it's got a lot of grip, Its steering is very accurate. It's probably quite linear. It's got good poise. It doesn't get readily upset over lumps and bumps and surface changes and camber changes and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, if a car with all those attributes, you say, yeah, that car handles well. But that says nothing about how much fun it is to drive.
No, it doesn't.
That's more a measure of how safe it is to drive or how comfortable it is to drive. There are other cars which might be quite deficient in some of those respects, but which nevertheless make you feel alive when you get into them and make you want to set an alarm and get up and get out and get into the car and go off somewhere very early in the morning. Because you can be, bunging them into corners left, right and centre, laughing your socks off and that sort of. And all those cars have feel.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
The one thing in common with I would say pretty much every car that I've chosen to get up early in the morning to go and drive is because they have just felt great. That's why I own a Caterham. Nothing feels better than a Caterham.
No.
And that is such an important distinction to make. So you've got, handling well can apply equally to two completely different set of attributes. So I think what you mean is this car handles well insofar as that it is very stable and accurate and planted and grippy and everything else.
It's capable and competent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether or not it's fun to drive, well, I don't know yet. I'll find out. I have my suspicions. But, I mean, that aside, so far it's a very likeable, quite impressive car.
Good-looking car too, isn't it?
Fantastic looking car. It's got a
Every
really
time I
good...
see one on the motorway.
Yeah.
Which isn't that often, actually. But I always notice it. And I'm really bad at noticing stuff because most cars look the same to me these days.
It does look good.
But you really notice those. I think they look fantastic.
It's got a good cabin as well, partly because it's still got a lot of physical buttons.
Yay.
For the HVAC in particular and other bits and pieces. It's not all just touchscreen, which I really like. This is the first EV that I've lived with. So I've had them for days at a time, not months at a time.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of an exploration for me. I don't currently have charging at home. So I'm going to live with it for a couple of weeks at least and see if it's bearable, relying entirely on the public charge network.
It's just going to be expensive and time-consuming, isn't it?
Using the fast charge network is going to be like running a V8.
I'm going to predict that by the time... So what people may not know is we record these podcasts in 3-week tranches. So by the time we reconvene in 3 weeks' time, I'm going to bet here and now and on the record that you've either got a charger or you've got one on order, because you just will, because you're not going to get on with public charging.
I've accepted that I am going to have one fitted.
You're going to have to. You are going to have to.
But I want to, as an experiment, I just want to see what it's like. Relying on the public charge.
I can tell you now,
it's a nightmare.
It's going to be horrible.
Okay, well there we go. It'll be interesting. So it does mean that I am selling my lovely little VW Up GTI.
This wouldn't be a completely unprofessional plug to try and sell your car.
Would I?
On the TI podcast.
Would I?
Shame on you.
Actually, that's exactly what it is. 61,000 miles.
Buy Dan's Up.
It's got a VW warranty until March 2026. It's done. I'm the second owner. It's been serviced every year on the dot. It's a lovely little car.
Only very carefully driven.
Well, that's a lie. But if anyone does want it, please message through the usual channels. So
what are the usual channels?
Well, they can find us on Instagram or on Twitter. Or we're easy to find. Or head to the-intercooler.com and find the email address.
info@the-intercooler.com.
Oh, there you go. That's easy.
Yeah, that'll do it.
So you wanted to talk... This really is the EV episode. You wanted to talk about the Porsche Macan, didn't you?
Yes. I'm sorry. We really didn't plan it. We just, we come in and we do these magazine format things and we just think, I want to talk about that.
What have we been up to recently?
What have we been up to recently? Yeah. And I guess it just reflects the way of the world, isn't it? Increasingly. So I sit on a thing called the Car of the Year jury, and the shortlist has just been announced. And all but one of them is an EV.
What's the non-EV?
Dacia Duster.
Okay.
So... yeah, it's just the way the world is.
It is.
And I'm not necessarily saying that that's a good or a bad thing. It's just the way that it is. So, nevertheless, Porsches. We talk about Porsche on this and the Macan. So we reviewed it. In fact, Andrew English reviewed the Macan from its international launch in Spain, I think.
Yeah, he drove the Macan 4.
Yeah, back in April. So I have now had some time to spend in a Macan Turbo, the flagship car, which of course doesn't have a turbo anywhere near it. In the UK, and I guess because I had such admiration for the old Macan, because when the old Macan is 10 years old now, And when it first came out, I really thought that Porsche had sold out, because here was this thing, which was sitting on an already 6-year-old Audi platform. And I just thought, come on, guys, no sign of a V8 engine anywhere. And then I drove it. And from that moment until this, it has been my favourite of that type of sort of medium-large SUV, because somehow they just managed to get this ancient Audi platform to do things that nobody else had ever got to do. And they're just, they are just really, by the standards of their class, they are just more engaging, more entertaining, more satisfying, just nicer things to be in than anything else, which is why for most of those years it has been the best-selling Porsche. Even the Cayenne tend to sort of take it in turns to be the best-selling Porsche. And unlike the Cayenne, which in that period of time had a completely new second generation, unrelated to the first, the Macan is still, okay, it's had updates and there's that and the other, and I'm sure that all sorts of bits have changed on it, but it's still basically the same car that it was 10 years ago, which means that it's still, sitting on a now, whatever it is, 16-year-old platform. And anyway, so the new one comes along. So this is the new Macan, which is, of course, as is the way of all flesh these days, entirely electric. It is a new car from end to end. And I just thought it would be really interesting to spend a bit of time in it and just see whether it had somehow managed to recapture the spirit of the original. And it's a mixed picture. I think some people don't like the way it looks. Do you like the way it looks?
Yeah, it looks cool.
I think it looks really cool. And, we shouldn't dwell on such matters because they're so subjective, and, we're really no better judge of a car's looks than you or anybody else. But I guess because we have seen them in the flesh, spent time with them, crawled in and out and around them, I guess we have some perspective to offer at the moment. And it does look really good. Inside, it just feels like build quality has just gone on a level. It really does feel beautifully put together, very glossy, high quality materials, very impressive. There's not an enormous amount of space in the back, but you wouldn't expect it because they've still got a Cayenne to sell. Big boot, no complaints. And you get in it, and of course it goes like an absolute lunatic. It's whatever it is. It's 3.3 seconds to 60, something like that. As quick as a McLaren F1. All the usual stuff. It's got 1,000 pound-feet of torque and all that sort. And so it's incredibly quick. Disappointing is the fact that they haven't tried to make the powertrain, give the powertrain any character at all. We always talk about the Hyundai i5N, but only because it's the only example of a car manufacturer which has decided to have a sense of humour.
By the way, I think particularly anyone who's building what's supposed to be a fun EV, I think they're going to have to incorporate something like the i5N's simulated gear shifts and sound.
Yeah, so and we've talked about that on the podcast before, so we won't dwell on that. But basically, if you haven't heard, the i5N has a button you can press, and it basically pretends it's an ICE car.
Yeah,
it sounds like a very highly tuned 4-cylinder engine. It's the paddles suddenly turn into gear shifts. It starts, and it's got torque strategies which mimic gear behavior. Yeah. It's got a rev limiter on it. You can just park it on the limiter and it'll just go ba 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 ba. Anyway, the Porsche doesn't do any of those things. I understand why that is, because if you're Hyundai and you're not steeped in motorsport history, obviously they're doing things in rallying now, and that's great, but you're not exactly Porsche with a bazillion Le Mans wins and everything. If Porsche did that, people might just go, "Oh, come on."
Yeah, I get that.
You're above that sort of thing, guys. My view is give them the choice. It's on a button. Yeah. If you don't like it, don't have it.
And just going back to the Alpine, actually, that is the kind of car that should have something like the Hyundai simulated gear shifts.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And but I think that, frankly, all EVs with any kind of sporting pretension, be they a little Alpine or really quite a big Porsche, I just and particularly with Porsche with their sort of archive of sounds and their motorsport history, I don't see. Given that you can turn it off, I can't really see the harm in doing that. But it doesn't even have paddles. Some EVs, in fact, a lot of EVs give you paddles where, like, one paddle will scroll through the drive modes and the other one will give you different levels of brake regen. Well, it doesn't do that. And I thought that was a missed opportunity. Then again, talking about the way it gets down the road, it's kind of like what you were saying about your Audi. It is, but the difference is, I guess, is that the Audi is very low slung and looks sporting, and you would expect that of it. The Macan, given how big and how heavy it is, I can't remember how heavy it is, about 2.2, I think, maybe 2.4, maybe. I think it's 2.4. It's hugely heavy.
Wow, that is heavy.
Yeah, it's massively heavy. You just can't believe how quickly and capably and safely this thing will get down a road. It is, I wouldn't say it defies physics, but it certainly defies expectations. It is astonishingly capable. Now, to go to talk about the other measure we were talking about, is it actually at the same time any fun to drive? Well, not particularly, but I'm not sure how important that is when you're talking about an SUV like that. I don't think people buy
that's
Macans.
fair enough. Yeah.
You know, it's certainly more rewarding than anything else I've driven in that space. And so I guess in those terms, it follows on in the footsteps of its predecessor. But it still isn't that sort of interactive feel-some whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I do know, and I think it as I was saying, I think it comes down to weight. I really do. I haven't driven any car heavier than 2 tons that manages to do that stuff.
No.
What do you make of the list price of the Macan Turbo at £96,900?
Yeah, well, I mean, do you know what? The sad thing is it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
You can buy, so in the UK, unlike anywhere else in Europe, or certainly unlike anywhere else in the EU, the current petrol Macan is still on sale and will be on sale for an unspecified period of time. And you can get a rear drive Macan, you can get a 4-wheel drive Macan, you can get a GTS. You can't get a Macan Turbo, so we cannot do a like-for-like price comparison. But I think a Macan GTS, which is the most expensive petrol Macan, you can get about £75,000 at the moment. These cars are just massively expensive, and I guess the market will decide. But yeah, as I said, the sad thing is that I'm not surprised by how expensive it is. It's kind of what you would expect. Whether the customer regards that as a sensible price to pay for a car like that, I think time alone will tell. From what I've read from what Andrew English, who's as good a judge of cars as I've ever met in my life, my strong suspicion is that if I drove a standard Macan 4, which is, I don't know, £25,000 cheaper, something like that, I suspect it wouldn't have a lot of the stuff that I don't really want, like 3.3 seconds to 60, doesn't interest me. Yeah. But it would be a 3-figure number of kilograms lighter, and I suspect that much more involving to drive. It will, I presume, have a better range. I think it'll just be better at the things that people actually need a car like that to do, and at the things that a person like me actually wants a car like that to do.
Yeah.
I suspect it would just be, in all regards, save a few headline statistics, just a better car to have. But I haven't driven one, so
and a lot cheaper too.
I look forward to making its acquaintance.
Good. That was the EV episode.
Comms, are we done?
Without me, yeah, we are.
It's rattled past.
We did fly through
Who
that
thought
one.
you could spend an hour talking about EVs and it would just
fly by.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we won't do that again anytime soon. But thank you for bearing with us, everyone. That's just what we've been up to recently, isn't it? That's what's been in the news. That's what we've been driving. So there it is. Well, before we go, I will just remind you all that as a podcast listener, you can subscribe to the Intercooler app and website for 15% off. Use coupon code POD15 at checkout and you'll get that 15% off for life. Thank you, everyone who has already redeemed that coupon code, that offer. We really appreciate it. And before you disappear, please just remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow the show on whichever podcast app you're using. And in return, we'll be back with another episode next week.
Bye.